Good morning. Access to reliable and affordable cell phone and internet service is essential to our everyday lives. Yet Canadians continue to pay some of the highest prices in the entire world for our cell phone and internet access. L'accès à des services de téléphonie cellulaire et d'Internet est essentiel, surtout des services fiables et abordables. Pourtant, les Canadiens paient toujours plus que les autres. With inflation rising, families are struggling to make ends meet. Justin Trudeau still hasn't delivered on his commitment to give Canadians a break on their cell phone bills. And there are still communities that don't have access to high-speed internet because Mr. Trudeau has been so slow bringing high speed to more of the country. With Canada's recovery plan, we have a plan to lower cell phone and internet bills for Canadians. Avec le plan de rétablissement du Canada, on va réduire les facteurs de téléphonie cellulaire et d'Internet. A big reason for high cell phone bills is a lack of competition. We need more players in the Canadian market to help improve wireless choice and affordability for consumers. But Canada currently bans foreign companies from competing here, leaving Canadians with limited choice and higher prices. Canada's Conservatives will allow foreign companies from places like Europe and the United States to offer cell phone and internet service here. We'll let in companies from countries that allow our companies to compete in their markets. Un gouvernement conservateur va permettre aux entreprises de l'Europe et des États-Unis d'offrir des services de téléphonie cellulaire et d'Internet au Canada. Et on va permettre à nos entreprises de faire concurrence sur les marchés étrangers. This will mean more choice and lower prices for Canadians and help ensure that all Canadians have access to high-speed internet service. Let me also be very clear. Canada's Conservatives will stand up to corporate Canada and reject mergers that substantially reduce competition and lead to layoffs and higher prices. And we will help lower prices by ensuring that local and regional players have access to the spectrum they need. Je vais être très clair. Les conservateurs vont tenir tête aux grandes entreprises canadiennes. On va refuser les fusions qui réduisent la concurrence, qui entraînent des mises à pied et qui augmentent les prix. Pour réduire les prix, on va s'assurer que les fournisseurs locaux et régionaux ont accès au spectre dont ils ont besoin. To help Canadians living outside our big cities, we'll also connect all of Canada to high-speed internet by 2025. Justin Trudeau's current federal target won't deliver universal high-speed internet until 2030. Canadians can't wait 9 more years. Pour aider les Canadiens qui vivent en milieu rural, on va connecter tout le Canada à Internet haute vitesse d'ici 2025. Mais avec Justin Trudeau, les Canadiens vont devoir attendre. Le chef libéral planifiait de connecter le Canada uniquement en 2030. Les Canadiens n'en peuvent plus d'attendre, encore moins une autre 9 ans de plus. Canada's Conservatives will always put the interests of Canadian consumers first. We will deliver more competition, more reliability, and more affordable options for families and businesses. Canada's Conservatives are the only choice to secure the future and ensure affordable cell phone and internet service for you and your family. Seuls les conservateurs vont offrir des services de téléphonie cellulaire et d'Internet abordables. Seuls les conservateurs vont agir pour l'avenir. Together, we will secure the future for Canadian families. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions. Allons maintenant prendre les questions. First question.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Mr. O'Toole, you spent more time in this room on this election campaign than anywhere else in the country, and you've been insulated from the kind of scenes that we saw confront the Liberal campaign last night in London. But when you do go out, we don't see those kinds of scenes at your campaign. What is it you think about Mr. Trudeau that attracts that kind of anger, now even violence, people throwing gravel at him, that you don't?
Well, let me repeat what I've said. It's completely unacceptable to see harassment of political figures, of media. We live in a great democracy, and let's act like we do. We can debate our ideas. I don't agree with the fact we're even having an election. I don't agree with Mr. Trudeau's approach on many things, but I respect his ability to be able to communicate with Canadians free of harassment, intimidation, and violence, and for our media to report on that. And we should remember the country we are, which is a great democracy, that we need to have an election that reflects that. We're trying to run in a pandemic election as safe of a campaign as possible. That's why we use our studio to talk about our recovery plan in person, in the studio, every day in a way that's safe and positive. C'est totalement inacceptable de voir l'harcèlement des candidats, des chefs de médias. Nous habitons dans une démocratie et on doit avoir un débat sur les idées pour notre avenir. Et pour moi, comme un chef dans une élection en pleine d'une pandémie, on doit utiliser notre studio, on doit avoir des événements sécuritaires parce que c'est très important de parler sur ma vision et notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, mais dans une manière sécuritaire dans une pandémie.
Yesterday, you spoke about an approach of respect to people who have different opinions about vaccination. Having seen those pictures from last night and from the days previous, people yelling racist remarks, misogynistic remarks at supporters at Mr. Trudeau's events, do you really feel that way, that people should respect those opinions?
I think we have to get as many people in this country vaccinated as possible. That's why every day, for the last year, I've talked about the need to have a steady supply of vaccines. Vaccines are safe and effective for use. And if people do have any questions, let's answer those questions and get people vaccinated. We have a target to try and get to 90% to get close to herd immunity so we can turn the page on COVID-19. I think that's what everyone wants. And let me reiterate, there is never an excuse to intimidate people, to promote violence, or to harass people, when in Canada we should have a healthy debate about the future of our country. That type of conduct is unacceptable towards anyone. So we're trying to run a positive campaign based on our plan, based on providing a roadmap to being better prepared for a pandemic in the future, and we're trying to conduct ourselves in a positive way and professional at every step.
Next question.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. You know, this may be our last chance to talk to you before we get into these debates, and I was kind of hoping, I think like many voters, we'd see some costs in your platform, a specific line-by-line item of the costs. I understand you were asked about this earlier, and you had some thinking about the PBO we're waiting on, but as you perfectly well know, you do not need to wait for the PBO to tell Canadians how much, for example, you're going to spend on rural broadband and everything else in your platform. So can you tell us what's the total bill for the spending? What's the total revenue that you're going to have in your platform? And when will we see that? When will you amend your platform one more time?
Well, thanks, David. We launched our plan, Canada's Recovery Plan, on the first full day of this campaign. We think Canadians deserve a plan to get the country back on its feet, for jobs, for accountability, for leadership on mental health, for being more prepared in the future, and for getting back to balance over the course of the next decade. That is our commitment. We are making some spending priorities in a record way for our public health care system, for mental health, for addiction. But we're also going to get spending under control, because the cost of living crisis families are facing is fueled in part by Mr. Trudeau's out-of-control spending. And when we launched our plan, we said we would have an update from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. We will have that, I hope, shortly. And that was a process that Mr. Trudeau set up. We could not access the PBO until the campaign began. We will update Canada's recovery plan as soon as we get that confirmation.
Okay, so that PBO excuse is like, sorry, the cat ate my homework kind of stuff. You perfectly well know you don't need the PBO to present a costing platform. We've had lots of elections without a PBO, and parties present the costs of their platform. Let me pick up on one more thing you just said. You said you're going to have balanced budget in the decade. Your platform talks assuming 3% growth. Where did that come from? Can you tell us who is telling you that this country is going to average 3% economic growth? Because I don't know of an economist that does. And can we speak to that economist who gave you that number?
We have a very ambitious plan to get our country back on its feet, David. We are supporting people getting back to work in all sectors of the economy. We don't want to transition entire parts of our country, as Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh do. We want to help the highly affected sectors like hospitality, restaurants, travel, tourism that we've been advocating for a year that couldn't even get specific plans from Mr. Trudeau, who's just been kicking the can down the road with the same programs that were set up at the first wave, yet Mr. Trudeau didn't learn any of the lessons by the third wave. We're going to get this country working, and I am glad we have ambition to have a strong economy. We need a strong economy to tackle climate change, to tackle inequalities, to walk the path of reconciliation. And so we have an ambitious plan, but we know we can attain our targets, and our balanced budget approach will be disciplined over a period of time so that we can help people in the short term, get our economy on a solid footing, and then get Mr. Trudeau's reckless spending under control.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Les maires des grandes villes québécoises s'inquiètent du flou sur votre position concernant les armes à feu. La mairesse de Montréal est préoccupée de voir les armes utilisées, par exemple, dans les drames de Polytechnique, du Collège Dawson, de les voir revenir éventuellement sur le marché. Pourquoi est-ce que vous gardez la porte ouverte à ce que ces armes-là soient de nouveau autorisées?
Comme j'ai dit, je vais maintenir les restrictions sur les armes à feu en place et avoir un processus transparent sur notre système de classification. Et je vais travailler en étroite collaboration avec la mairesse, toutes les municipalités, les provinces contre les gangs de rue et le contreband. Ça, c'est le problème à Montréal, à Vancouver, à Surrey. Et c'est après 6 ans d'inaction sur la frontière avec M. Trudeau, sans action avec nos policiers dans les grandes villes, on doit cibler les gangs de rue et cibler nos investissements sur la contrebande. On va corriger la situation avec la contrebande.
Mais
As I've said, we will maintain restrictions on firearms in place and launch a public and transparent process for our classification system to take out the politics. But I look to partner with our big city mayors who have been struggling with a rising street gang and organized crime with brazen shootings from Montreal to Vancouver to Surrey, largely driven by illegally smuggled firearms from the United States. That problem has gotten worse under Mr. Trudeau. We're going to work with police, work with mayors, work with provinces to tackle this smuggling issue and to give the tools needed to stop these brazen gang shootings.
sur un autre sujet, un conseil scolaire francophone catholique en Ontario a décidé de se débarrasser de 5000 livres, dont des bandes dessinées de Tintin et d'Astérix, parce qu'ils propageaient des stéréotypes sur les Autochtones. Je veux savoir, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de cette décision-là?
La réconciliation est importante pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes. Et on doit avoir un système d'éducation sans discrimination. C'est un sujet important pour moi comme chef, la réconciliation. Et on doit avoir une tolérance zéro pour la discrimination.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You said yesterday you're not going to prejudge the outcome of a firearm classification review. So if you're leaving the door open for once again legalizing guns like the AR-15, isn't the footnote in your platform disingenuous?
I want all Canadians to know that public safety is a priority for me as a potential Prime Minister, but as a father of kids in the suburbs. We want to see safe communities across this country. And to do that, we're going to make sure that we give police and law enforcement officials at the border the tools to keep the illegal smuggling of weapons out of our country. That has driven an increase in some of these violent crimes in recent years under Mr. Trudeau. We will maintain restrictions on firearms in place and launch a public and transparent review to make sure we take the politics out of decisions related to public safety. But I've been very clear, public safety is critical, and these shootings in our cities that police need additional tools to fight against, our Canada Recovery Plan will give them the tools to tackle this issue.
With respect, Mr. O'Toole, you didn't answer the question and you haven't been clear. You say the restrictions will stay in place. Will those restrictions stay in place on a permanent basis under a Conservative government, or will they only be temporary until you do this review?
As I've said, the restrictions will remain in place. The assault weapon ban and the Order in Council provisions from 2020. We are going to have an independent and public review of our classification system because sadly, it has been used to divide Canadians and mislead Canadians. Mr. Trudeau has been importing this type of American politics literally every week of this campaign, manipulating video, misleading people, and importing these type of divisive debates from the United States. That's why I want to have a public and transparent process so that we can take that sort of us versus them approach out of questions related to public safety.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. John Ibbotson, Globe and Mail. Did your campaign director, Fred Delory, who once represented the gun lobby, recuse himself from the development of your party's gun policies in the same manner that Dan Mader did on the gig economy platform proposal?
Yes. And in fact, for many years, I've said we have to have an approach on public safety that focuses on where the issue is, which is this criminal smuggling issue. We have to actually work with CBSA and border officials in the United States to stop this, not just at the border, but before it happens. And I've said for many years, for issues like public safety, we have to take the divisive politics out of these discussions. We have to focus on keeping Canadians safe, having a transparent process for the screening, the training, and the licensing that goes behind our classification process for farmers and hunters who are not the problem with public safety. We see the problem is street gangs, criminal organization using those firearms that are smuggled in from the United States. On doit avoir une approche sur notre système de classification transparent, sans politique. C'est très important d'enlever les politiques de style américain dans notre discussion sur la sécurité publique. Et notre plan, on a un plan indépendant basé sur mes idées sur la sécurité publique et un processus transparent sur le système de classification.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Boris Proulx du journal Le Devoir. On a vu beaucoup de pancartes ou de panneaux du Parti populaire du Canada de Maxime Bernier lors de manifestations contre le chef libéral Justin Trudeau. On ne vous entend pas beaucoup critiquer Maxime Bernier ou critiquer le Parti populaire du Canada, donc j'aimerais savoir si vous avez une réflexion sur le type de politique ou leur façon de faire campagne.
Comme j'ai dit, l'harcèlement et les manifestations violentes contre les autres chefs ou contre les médias sont totalement inacceptables par les partisans de notre parti ou des manifestants seuls. C'est très important d'avoir un débat sensible et respectueux dans une élection, dans une démocratie comme le Canada.
En suivi, vous avez dit tout à l'heure qu'un gouvernement conservateur va se tenir debout contre les grandes entreprises. J'aimerais savoir si vous avez une réflexion sur le gouvernement Harper, qui était au pouvoir évidemment jusqu'en 2015. Est-ce que le précédent gouvernement de Stephen Harper se tenait debout suffisamment contre les grandes entreprises, notamment pour la question des grandes télécoms?
Je suis un nouveau chef avec une nouvelle approche sur la concurrence et c'est très important pour moi d'avoir plus de concurrence parce que ça va créer une diminution des prix pour les consommateurs. Et c'est pourquoi je vais arrêter les fusions entre les grandes entreprises si c'est mauvais pour les consommateurs. Plus de concurrence est excellent pour notre pays. En pleine d'une crise du coût de la vie maintenant, et on a des politiques sur l'engagement, sur les facteurs d'aider les Canadiens et impose pour la TPS en décembre, les Canadiens et les Canadiennes méritent un break.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. David Cochran with CBC News. I have a question on guns, and I have to ask about Mr. Delory's role as a lobbyist for the National Firearm Association and past discussions about building a political machine to flip marginal Liberal seats and now playing a senior role in this campaign and your leadership. And your past comments when seeking the leadership were on rolling back gun restrictions were far more what the gun lobby wanted to see than the shifting answers of this past week. So how should Canadians view Mr. Delory's past connections and now senior role in your campaign, your shifting positions on this over the years, and will you maintain the ban on the semi-automatic assault rifles from 2020 even after the review process is complete?
Well, David, let me be clear. I will maintain the restrictions in place and have a public and transparent system to review classification. Probably the most consistent comment I've had on this subject over the last number of years is the need to take the politics out of it. We need a fact-driven and a science-driven independent process so that people aren't divided over a subject of public safety and security. In fact, it's been troubling to see Mr. Trudeau use the tragedy in Nova Scotia to suggest that that was because of law-abiding people. Let's actually get the public inquiry rolling, which he tried to prevent, because in that situation, the crime was perpetrated by someone who obtained firearms illegally. We need to tackle that issue and stop using the politics to divide people. Let's put the investments to police, to the border, to tackle the real issue that we're seeing lead to rising violent crime rates under Mr. Trudeau's watch. Let's not divide, let's focus on public safety and security, and that will be my approach.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. JP Tasker from CBC News. Justin Trudeau said yesterday you're beholden to the far-right anti-vax wing of your party when it comes to vaccine mandates. Given what he said about that, will you commit today to appointing a health minister who has been fully vaccinated? You've been asked this question before. We'd like a clear answer on this today. A health minister who's fully vaccinated. Will you commit to that today?
Yes. And here is something Mr. Trudeau seems to forget. I've been advocating for vaccines for over a year. In fact, I was very critical in Mr. Trudeau's decision to partner with a state-owned Chinese enterprise to give vaccines to Canadians. It's why we were 4 months late. It's why we were behind a lot of other countries. It's why, with myself and my wife having COVID ourselves, we publicized our vaccination process through a video. Mr. Trudeau praised that at the time, that we were being so public promoting vaccines. It's been very, very disappointing to see every week in this campaign Mr. Trudeau misleading people and saying whatever he wants to say to try and get reelected. We should not be doing that in a pandemic election that he called for his own self-interest. So the answer to that question is yes, and I hope he stops trying to divide people over a question related to health.
Ce sera la dernière question. This will be the last question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole. Vincent Gosselin du 92.5 Saguenay. J'aimerais revenir sur le Conseil scolaire de l'Ontario qui s'est débarrassé de 5000 livres. Vous avez parlé de réconciliation. Vous avez dit qu'on doit avoir un système d'éducation sans discrimination. Mais selon vous, à votre avis, est-ce qu'il s'agit de la censure, ce qui s'est produit?
La réconciliation est primordiale pour notre société. C'est pourquoi c'était ma première question de la Chambre des communes comme chef de l'opposition. Et c'est possible d'enlever les livres et les bandes dessinées sans les brûler, mais on doit avoir une approche de respect sur les questions sur la réconciliation et notre histoire.
Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. It'll be all for today. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.